Ethan Carter had always believed that silence was a kind of language, one that revealed truths people rarely dared to speak. The quiet, dense forest that surrounded the new research base felt like a continuation of that belief. It was peaceful, but it held secrets. When he and his partner Clara moved to the edge of the wildlife preserve, he thought it would be a fresh beginning, a chance to mend what routine and distance had quietly damaged between them. But beginnings, he was learning, had a way of testing what was already fragile. Clara noticed the shift before Ethan did. The way his attention drifted during breakfast, the way he stared out at the misty horizon longer than necessary, as if waiting for something to appear. She tried to fill the silence with conversation, stories about the house, the neighbors, the endless unpacking, but his responses came slower each day. He wasn't cold, just absent, like someone walking through the research facility. Ethan found himself absorbed in a new assignment, an environmental study focused on the migratory behavior of forest mammals. It was the kind of work that demanded patience and observation, both qualities he possessed in abundance. When the project coordinator introduced a new field assistant, a volunteer from an environmental NGO in Kenya, Ethan hardly looked up at first. But when Malik Kato entered the room, something about the man's calm presence caught his attention. Malik was unlike anyone Ethan had worked with before. He was confident but not loud, his movements deliberate, his smile easy yet restrained. There was a steadiness about him that seemed to quiet the noise around him. During the briefing, he listened more than he spoke, nodding thoughtfully as though every detail carried weight. When their eyes met briefly across the table, Ethan felt something unspoken pass between them, a faint recognition, not of familiarity, but of intrigue. Over the next week, their paths crossed often. Malik assisted with data collection, sometimes joining Ethan in the lab to review samples or note field results. Their conversations began formally, technical, precise, but gradually drifted into personal territory. Malik spoke of his homeland, of dry seasons and green valleys, of how nature taught him patience. Ethan, in turn, found himself sharing small details about his own life, his love for the rain, his unease with crowds, his habit of collecting old maps. Clara noticed that he returned home later each evening. When she asked if the workload was heavy, Ethan simply nodded, adding that Malik was efficient and that the team's progress depended on long hours. She smiled politely but watched his face as he spoke, sensing that something had changed beneath his calm surface. The first real sign came a week later, during a team meeting. The institute announced an upcoming field assessment, a 3-day survival and observation exercise deep inside the jungle. 2-person teams would venture out to test their endurance and record nocturnal animal activity. Ethan volunteered immediately, surprising even himself with how quickly he raised his hand. When the coordinator asked for his chosen partner, he said Malik's name without hesitation. Later that night, Clara asked why he hadn't picked one of his longtime colleagues. Ethan shrugged. Malik's reliable. He's good in the field, he said, though even to himself, the words felt rehearsed. She said nothing more, only reached across the table to squeeze his hand. Her touch was warm, familiar, yet something inside him stayed distant, unreachable. In the days leading up to the expedition, Ethan felt an unfamiliar restlessness. He told himself it was the anticipation of the fieldwork, the challenge of navigating wild terrain. But beneath that reasoning pulsed a quieter truth, curiosity. He wanted to understand Malik beyond the polite exchanges and professional boundaries. There was a depth to him, a quiet confidence that drew Ethan closer, not through words but through presence. The morning of departure arrived with a mist that hung low over the trees. Clara helped him pack, folding his clothes neatly, slipping a small note into the side pocket of his bag. "For when you can't sleep," she said with a faint smile. Ethan kissed her forehead, thanked her softly, and promised to call once they returned. She watched from the porch as he loaded his gear into the truck, her hand raised in a wave that lingered long after he disappeared down the dirt road. The drive to the jungle was long, winding through narrow paths and forgotten villages. Malik sat beside him, occasionally pointing out a tree species or the tracks of a wild animal in the dust. Their conversation was sparse but comfortable. There was a rhythm between them, built not from familiarity but from a shared understanding of solitude. By the time they reached the forest base, the sun had dipped low, staining the sky in shades of gold and crimson. They unloaded their supplies, checked their equipment, and set up camp by a small river clearing. The sound of flowing water mingled with the distant calls of unseen creatures. Malik gathered wood for the fire while Ethan assembled the tent, their movements wordless yet synchronized. As the flames rose, Malik sat across from Ethan, his face illuminated by the orange light. He began to speak about his childhood, the sound of drums on nights of celebration, the scent of rain on dry earth. His voice carried warmth, unhurried, almost melodic. Ethan listened, drawn in by the simple honesty of it. When Malik asked about his life, Ethan hesitated before answering. He spoke of his city, his studies, his relationship with Clara, but his words felt thin, as if describing someone else's existence. The night deepened, the forest alive with whispers. A silence stretched between them, neither heavy nor awkward, just present. Malik looked into the fire, then at Ethan. "Sometimes," he said softly, "we go far to find what we were afraid to see close to home." Ethan didn't reply. The words lingered in his mind long after Malik turned away. He thought of Clara, of their quiet dinners, their unspoken distance, and wondered what he was truly searching for in this place. The forest around them seemed to pulse with unseen life. Crickets hummed, the river murmured, and the fire crackled in small bursts. Ethan felt both alone and understood in a way he couldn't name. It wasn't attraction he felt, not yet, but recognition, as though Malik's presence mirrored something hidden within himself. When he finally lay down inside the tent, the night air cool against his skin, he could still hear Malik moving outside, humming a faint tune in his native tongue. The melody faded slowly, leaving Ethan awake with thoughts that refused to quiet. Tomorrow, they would begin their test, 3 days alone in the wilderness. But even now, Ethan sensed that what awaited them wasn't merely a test of survival. It would be something deeper, quieter, and far more revealing. That he closed his eyes, listening to the forest breathe. The silence, once familiar, now carried a question he wasn't sure he wanted answered. Ethan stared at his phone long after Logan's message had arrived, the glow illuminating his restless expression in the dim light of his apartment. "See you tomorrow. There's something I want to show you." The words seemed innocent, yet they carried a weight that made Ethan's chest tighten. He knew this meeting was inevitable, that whatever Logan wanted to show him would push boundaries he had been trying to maintain. And yet, a part of him, a part he couldn't silence, was eager, almost desperate, to see what lay beyond that line. The following afternoon, they met at a quiet park on the edge of town. Autumn leaves drifted lazily around them, and the crisp air carried the faint scent of wood smoke from distant chimneys. Logan was already there, leaning against a tree, his hands stuffed casually into his jacket pockets, a small, knowing smile playing at his lips. The sight of him sent a shiver down Ethan's spine, an electric anticipation that made him stumble over his words. "Hey," Logan greeted, voice low, warm, casual. "Thanks for coming." "Of course," Ethan replied, forcing calm into his tone, though his heart thumped so loudly he was sure Logan could hear it. They walked along a winding path, conversation light at first, laughter punctuating the chill air. Yet beneath it all, the tension between them was palpable. Every glance, every brush of a sleeve against the other's arm carried unspoken meaning. Logan's eyes lingered longer than usual, and Ethan caught himself holding that gaze, caught in a magnetism that was impossible to ignore. Eventually, they reached a secluded bench near a small pond. Logan gestured for Ethan to sit. "I wanted to show you something," he said, producing a small notebook from his jacket. "I write sometimes. Thoughts, stories, reflections. You might like it." Ethan hesitated, curiosity battling with apprehension. He took the notebook, and as he flipped through pages, he realized the entries were more personal than he had expected, reflections on friendship, longing, and the subtle ache of unspoken attraction. Each word seemed to speak directly to Ethan, bypassing his defenses and planting seeds of desire and confusion. "Didn't know you felt any of this," Ethan murmured, his fingers tracing the words, his pulse accelerating. Logan leaned closer, just slightly, enough for the warmth of his shoulder to brush Ethan's. "I didn't mean for you to read it all at once," he said softly, voice barely above the rustle of leaves. "But I wanted you to understand me, in a way no one else does." Ethan felt a wave of conflicting emotions. There was guilt, for the intensity of the attraction he felt for someone who was supposed to be untouchable in his mind. There was fear, for the potential consequences if Aiden ever discovered the depth of their connection. And there was undeniable, heady excitement, a thrill that coursed through him like electricity. They sat in silence for a moment, the air thick with anticipation. Logan's gaze held Ethan's, steady and unrelenting, and in that unspoken space, the boundaries they had been skirting all week began to blur. The brush of a hand against a notebook, the accidental touch of knees under the bench, each action became a spark, igniting emotions neither could fully contain. Finally, Logan broke the quiet. "Ethan. I know this is complicated. And I know you care about Aiden, but," his words trailed, leaving the thought unfinished yet heavy with implication. Ethan swallowed hard, the weight of desire and guilt pressing on him from all sides. I don't know what to say," he admitted, voice tight. "This feels wrong." But at the same time, his sentence dissolved into a whisper, because there was no denying the pull he felt, the longing that had taken root in his chest. Logan smiled gently, understanding, patient. "You don't have to decide anything now," he said. "I just want you to know that this, whatever this is, exists. And it's real." That honesty, the vulnerability Logan allowed himself to show, only deepened Ethan's internal conflict. He felt drawn to Logan not just physically, but emotionally, in ways that scared and thrilled him all at once. Every word, every glance, every subtle gesture made him more aware of the delicate line they were walking, and how intoxicating it was to teeter on the edge. Over the next few days, the intensity of their interactions escalated. Messages became more frequent, filled with inside jokes, shared reflections, and hints of emotional intimacy that went beyond mere friendship. Ethan found himself laughing more freely, thinking more deeply, and noticing facets of himself he hadn't acknowledged before. Logan had a way of drawing out his vulnerabilities without ever seeming intrusive, and Ethan realized he was enjoying it, terrified as he was of the consequences. Yet, with every thrill came guilt. Aiden's trust weighed heavily on him, a constant reminder of the boundaries he was approaching. Ethan struggled with the duality of his feelings, the exhilaration of emotional closeness with Logan, and the heavy pang of betrayal that accompanied it. Each time he interacted with Logan, he was walking a tightrope, balancing desire against conscience, curiosity against loyalty. One evening, Ethan found himself pacing his apartment, replaying recent moments over and over. The memory of Logan's smile, the warmth of his casual touch, and the intensity of his gaze made it impossible to think clearly. He realized he was at a crossroads. The choice wasn't whether he was attracted to Logan, that was undeniable, but whether he would let himself fully cross into a territory that might change everything. By the end of the week, Logan invited Ethan to a late-night walk along the river. The city lights shimmered on the water, casting long reflections that danced and twisted with the gentle current. Logan spoke quietly, sincerely, about dreams, regrets, and the fleeting nature of certain opportunities. Ethan listened, mesmerized, feeling the pull of emotions he hadn't allowed himself to acknowledge. And then, as the night deepened, Logan stopped and turned to him. "Ethan, whatever happens between us, I want it to be something we both understand. Nothing forced. Nothing rushed. But I want you to know that I'm here. And I'm not leaving." Ethan felt a surge of warmth, confusion, and longing collide. He realized, with a mixture of fear and exhilaration, that he had already crossed the line emotionally, if not physically. There was no undoing the connection that had formed, no pretending it didn't exist. The question now was how he would navigate it, and whether he could survive the storm of desire, guilt, and the uncertain consequences that lay ahead. As he walked home alone that night, the city silent around him, Ethan understood something crucial: his life had changed. The line had been approached, tested, and subtly crossed, leaving him suspended between the safety of routine and the intoxicating pull of forbidden desire. And deep down, he knew this story, his story, was only just beginning. Ethan sat back on the couch, the journal still warm from his hands, and tried to anchor himself in the familiar hum of Liam's laughter. But the comfort he had relied on just hours ago felt fragile, almost artificial. His mind replayed every detail from the study, the way Greg had spoken, the subtle tension in his gaze, the quiet intensity that had made the journal feel like more than words on paper. What began as curiosity now teetered on the edge of something more complex, something that Ethan couldn't yet name. Liam's presence beside him was a grounding force, yet it also made Ethan hyper-aware of the dichotomy within himself. He could laugh at Liam's jokes, comment casually on the ongoing conversation, even offer a well-timed quip, but beneath the surface, his thoughts were tangled in intrigue and guilt. The journal rested on the coffee table, its leather cover a constant reminder of Greg's presence and the quiet intimacy of the encounter. Ethan knew that he had crossed an invisible line, not in any overt action, but in the way his attention and curiosity had been drawn, captivated by a man who was, in a very real sense, off-limits that he tried to rationalize it. Greg was charismatic, sophisticated, and undeniably intriguing. And yet, it wasn't just curiosity that unsettled him, it was the attention, the subtle recognition, the feeling of being seen in a way he hadn't experienced before. Ethan glanced at Liam, who was distracted with a casual conversation about a local music festival. The thought of sharing what had happened with him seemed impossible. Not because he wanted to hide anything maliciously, but because the emotions stirred by Greg were complicated, layered, and entirely unfamiliar. As the afternoon waned, Ethan found himself drifting toward the kitchen under the pretense of getting another drink. He was surprised to find Greg already there, seemingly waiting, though his posture suggested no urgency. "Thought I might find you here," Greg said lightly, offering a small smile. There was no accusation in his voice, only observation, and Ethan felt an unexpected shiver run through him. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator, but the silence between them was electric, heavy with unspoken possibility. "Just processing," Ethan said finally, forcing a casual tone. "A lot to take in, I guess." Greg nodded, as if he understood entirely, and for a moment, the space between them felt less like a barrier and more like a shared current of awareness. "That's good," Greg replied softly. "Processing is important. It tells you what matters, what draws attention, and sometimes, what you're willing to explore." The phrasing was deliberate, layered with ambiguity that made Ethan pause. He wondered what exactly Greg meant by explore, but found himself unable, or unwilling, to ask directly. Ethan returned to the living room, journal in hand, but he could not shake the way Greg's presence lingered in his mind. Every glance, every subtle gesture replayed in vivid detail. He felt a peculiar mixture of exhilaration and anxiety, the thrill of curiosity mingling with the weight of moral conflict. Liam's obliviousness offered both comfort and complication, comfort because the normality of their friendship remained, complication because it made Ethan acutely aware of the boundaries he might be crossing internally. That evening, the gathering began to disperse, guests offering polite goodbyes and casual promises to meet again. Ethan and Liam remained for a few moments longer, tidying up and exchanging laughter over small mishaps during the afternoon. But the energy had shifted, the earlier levity now carried a subtle undertone of tension, a residue from Ethan's encounter with Greg that he could neither dismiss nor fully articulate. Liam's uncle had left them alone for brief moments, and those moments felt disproportionately weighted in Ethan's mind. Later, as the house quieted and Liam went to check on some last-minute preparations for the evening, Ethan found himself alone with the journal again. He opened it, not necessarily to read, but to anchor himself, to relive the intensity of the connection he had experienced earlier. Each line seemed to resonate differently now, carrying layers of meaning he hadn't initially perceived. It wasn't merely a collection of thoughts, it was a conduit into someone else's perception of the world, and, by extension, a reflection on his own reactions. Ethan's phone buzzed, a message from Liam. "You okay, Carter? You've been quiet." Ethan stared at the screen, unsure how to respond. Any explanation would either betray the intimacy of what had occurred or reduce it to something clinical and incomplete. Instead, he typed a vague reply, "Just thinking. Long day." It was true, but incomplete, the kind of honesty that carried half-truths and silent acknowledgement. Hours later, Ethan found himself sitting in his own room, the day's events replaying with a clarity that was almost overwhelming. He realized that what had begun as a simple afternoon gathering had become a turning point, not just in terms of curiosity but in how he understood attraction, trust, and the boundaries of relationships. Greg's deliberate attention, the journal, and the subtle moments of quiet observation had opened doors within Ethan that he hadn't known existed. Doors that now felt impossible to ignore. He thought about loyalty, to Liam, to their friendship, to the lines he had previously drawn, and recognized the tension between ethics and emotion. This was not a clear-cut situation, and the complexity of it both fascinated and terrified him. He was compelled to understand, to explore, to confront the feelings that had been stirred, yet he was painfully aware that any action, or inaction, carried consequences. A knock at the door broke his thoughts. It was Liam, checking in one last time before leaving. "You all right?" he asked, concern threading his voice. Ethan nodded, masking the whirlwind of emotion with a practiced calm. "Yeah," he said simply. "Just, a lot to think about." Liam smiled faintly, accepting the answer at face value. The conversation ended there, but the tension lingered, invisible yet potent, shaping Ethan's thoughts and emotions long after the door closed. Later that night, Ethan returned to the journal one final time, flipping through the pages with a careful reverence. He paused on a passage reflecting on choices and consequences, on the subtle ways that attraction and curiosity shape our actions. Ethan realized that the surprise was never about a gift or an object, it was about awareness, about being seen and challenged, and about the quiet, powerful stirrings of desire and introspection. As he closed the journal and placed it carefully on his nightstand, Ethan understood that nothing would be quite the same. The ordinary rhythms of friendship, of casual interactions, and of his own self-perception had been disrupted, replaced by a complicated awareness of possibility. He could not predict what would happen next, nor could he fully control the trajectory of his emotions, but he felt a quiet certainty that the days ahead would demand courage, honesty, and careful reflection. The evening ended on a note of suspended tension, resolute, yet unresolved. Ethan lay awake, listening to the faint hum of the city beyond his window, knowing that the journey initiated by a single, enigmatic, surprise, had only just begun. Every choice from this point forward felt charged with consequence, every glance, every word, a potential catalyst for revelations yet to come. And in that quiet, suspended space, Ethan finally admitted to himself that the allure of curiosity, and of the unknown, was irresistible, even when it threatened to upend the familiar world he had once trusted so completely.